Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd continue with my library tour. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride. I haven't been feeling all that good. I certainly haven't felt like making videos standing up. I don't like that under any circumstance. It's rather barbaric. But we're doing an odd thing. We're doing a weird variation. We're ending up my library tour with my romance bookcase, which is hundreds of books. It's hundreds of mass market paperbacks. And the huge majority of those are Signet Regency romances. So you have today in the normal romance market, Avon and St. Martin's and whatnot, you have Regency romances that are set roughly during the Regency period when the Prince Regent was running the country for his ailing father, King George III, but was sort of an inattentive ruler, certainly not moral. So the high moral standard, this high moral tone that the court had set with King George and his wife, thoroughly English acting, upright citizens, sort of stern parental figures, was gone. That feeling in the country was gone, replaced by this kind of feeling of bacchanal, at least for the top 1,000 families, and at least in popular myth, which has led over the time countless romance writers to center their stories in the Regency period. And you still get Regency period romances in romance novels today. In fact, I think I'd have to double check with Sarah at Steeped in Books about this, or get her to number crunch. But I think that Regency romances are still the most popular, numerically speaking, of all the romance subgenres: contemporary, paranormal, Western, Highlander. I think they still win out. But they're this kind of thing. Notice this is the Earl next door. You'll notice some of the elements are the same. You have the bucolic setting. You have the country mansion in the background, but the two on the cover, her unmentionables, are touching his unmentionables, and his unmentionables are virtually unclothed. It's an extremely suggestive cover of a type that a Regency romance, a traditional Regency romance from the type I'm talking about, would never have done. And it's not just the cover, not at all. The characters get into each out of each other's arms almost immediately in these new Regency romances. And I'm not being a prude. You can still have a terrific story even with that kind of license, but you have to understand that's anachronistic. That's ahistorical. A person who behaved that way in the actual Regency period, or even was rumored to behave that way, would have been an absolute outcast, and nothing of the story would have been possible. It's just a flight of fancy in historical dress. Whereas the Regency romances that I'm talking about, the ones that we saw last time, are older. They're from the late 80s, or the late 70s, and all through the 80s, and maybe a bit of the 90s. The bulk of them were done by Signet, but there were a bunch of other publishers who did it, and they were of a type. Here's the first one. This is Margaret Somerville, the Improper Playwright. You notice right away, first of all, these two are in costume dress as Romeo and Juliet, but you notice right away that it's a painted cover. It's not done. Where does my example go? This is photoshopped over two living people, and this is not. And although there is suggestiveness involved, there's nothing like license involved. And that was the case with these things. This is from, I think, the late 80s, 1992. So right when these things, it was right around the early 90s that these things started shifting to photo covers, to photo overlay, Photoshop, primitive Photoshop covers. And then they dropped this programmatic format. These things were all very much of a similar length, and they all had a very much of a similar format. Headstrong woman, reserved and brooding male. The male is usually older than the woman. They're both of the landed gentry, and the plot has them tangling with each other and getting closer and closer to admitting that they love each other until finally they do. With the unspoken final act, the act that's not on page, being the wedding. These things, shortly after the 1992, 1994, something like that, not only did the covers change to become more photorealistic and a bit more suggestive, but the whole line dropped. And I love these things. I absolutely love the old-fashioned kind. Because if you don't have the characters jumping in and out of each other's arms, then you're forced as a writer to come up with other things to do to keep the reader entertained. And those other things will be plot twists and especially dialogue. And that's what I love about these things. They are the ultimate, for me, they are the ultimate palate cleanser, the ultimate innocent pleasure. in reading. Now, they take an hour to read, or in my case, prolonged over many commutes on the subway. I put one of these in the pocket of my bag. I don't bring anything else with me. I'm going to collect books every time I leave the house anyway, so this is what I bring to read. And they're guaranteed to leave you with a smile on your face. No matter what happens to the secondary characters, there will be no tragedies that are not brought on the villains. The villains are the only ones who suffer in these books. Old characters, very old characters, might die, but after what we will be told over and over again, was a long and fulfilling life. And the younger characters, will come to an exultant moment. The last thing you get in one of these old Regency romances will be an exultant moment, where a man who has been convinced by tattletales that the woman he has set his heart on throughout the book is actually betraying him, or is already married, or whatever, will suddenly realize that he's been a fool. Or the woman who has thought all throughout the book that the man she secretly loves is a heartless libertine will suddenly realize that she has been misled, and the final scene will be them realizing that. It's always wonderful. I've encountered that final scene in so many places, in parks, and on trains, and on subways, and I never fail to burst into a huge smile. I've actually had people on trains and subways ask me what I was reading that made me look that way. That's why I love these things, because you're guaranteed of that. This one even has a guarantee on the cover, but it's only that it's the first time in paperback, because romance readers get repackaged books all the time, and a lot of them don't remember from one thing to another. I'm not sure 100% that I would remember if you took 300 of these Regency romances and just slightly retitled them and gave them different covers. I'm not sure that I would remember that I read them. But anyway, we'll do a few of these. Like I said before, one of the ways that I use to organize these things is by author. I find that helps me to winnow out the doubles faster than anything else. If you're just looking at titles, you miss things. So we have a lot of the same author in a row. So not that it matters to you, but so this is The Improper Playwright by Margaret Somerville. I have quite a few of hers. She's really good. Beautiful young lady Verity de Lacy has a shocking secret talent and even more scandalous hidden ambition. Guess what it is? She wants to be an actress. She wrote riveting romantic plays and longed to see them performed in public. Oh no, she wants to be a playwright. Should the truth, she's the playwright of the title, I'm sure, The Improper Playwright. Should the truth come out, her parents would be furious. Her engagement to the sterling Marquis of Dorchester would be ended, and her reputation would be ruined. Yet she sent her latest dramatic creation to the handsome Brutus Ranley, a lord of the realm, a reigning star of the theater, and the king of rakes. Even though she might lose not only her good name, but her virtue and even her heart. So you see the plot line there. That's often a foil in these books, is that the young woman in the story will have her future mapped out with a perfectly worthy but boring young swain. And something that she does that somebody else does, a carriage wheel going off, or a bad snowstorm or whatever, will suddenly throw her into the path of the least likely paramour, in this case the king of rakes. And yet they will, through each other, through that happenstance, discover also that they're made for each other, and that I just love. I just love that. So now we have another Margaret Somerville. This is A Royal Connection. I know that the wags among you are going to guess immediately why I was attracted to this book. She has a tiny little dog of the type I once said I would never have, and he has a Scottish deerhound. I once upon a time had 2 Irish wolfhounds, and they're even bigger than Scottish deerhounds. But they're very placid, wonderful dogs. And you notice a lot of the similarities, right? We saw this thing. You'll notice a lot of the similarities here. You can definitely tell there's a plot unfolding, and you've got a country house in the background. So this is A Royal Connection. Often very dicey. These books will talk all about Prinny, the Prince Regent, but the characters, you cannot cross the line and have a character actually get to know either one of the royal sons or a royal bastard. That just virtually never happens in these books. It's sort of one of the unwritten lines. Lady Selina Paget possessed the rank, fortune, and figure to be a prize in the marriage mart, but alas, the gentleman of the ton bored her senseless. Only the Earl of Heathersfield attracted her, a man of mystery, a reputed seducer, and his brother's rival in the rarefied world of art collecting. And when he kissed her, he stole Selina's heart forever. Then Heathersfield's cousin arrived, a prince from far off Bruconia. See, you might have that. You might have Graustark-style Liechtenstein princes, but you won't ever have a royal prince of the line in England. No, that will never happen. Who'd come to court an English princess. Suddenly, Selina was caught up in a dizzying whirl of royal intrigue, dancing a quadrille of secret assignations and possible betrayal. Dangerous? Deliciously so. But a lady could be ruined by a misstep unless she tumbled into her true love's arms. Often thought the people who wrote the back of these books should really get an extra bonus at Christmas time. So this next one's a little bit old. You'll notice that, like for instance, A Royal Connection. I don't know if you can tell, but this is brand new. Still got the sheen on the cover. Perfect, absolutely perfect condition, like the day that it was made. Whereas, thanks to charity shops and library sales and the generosity of a lot of you, I have also received Regencies in various other forms of repair. And I don't mind that at all. A well-loved book in a case like this, I spend time imagining the people who read it before me. This is another Margaret Somerville. This is an older Signet Regency romance. This is probably from the 80s, 1987. And this is The Wicked Wager. And it's been around the block a few times. There was no doubt that Lady Olivia Dunbar was the most bewitching beauty in all of London. Every man dreamed of making her his own, yet none could capture her, for the elusive Olivia left her swarm of suitors with only dashed hopes and defeated designs. And there's going to be a man that doesn't want her. That's going to be the one that gets her. Yes, thus when the wager was made that Olivia could add Lord Ramsay to her list of conquests, the outcome seemed certain. How could this awkward, unfashionable, socially inexperienced country gentleman possibly resist as heavenly a heartbreaker as she? Too late, Olivia discovered she was playing her game of tease with a man who held some of the most surprising trumps. In this case, and this time, the broken heart might be her own. So you notice there's a lovely cover. All these things have lovely covers. You notice a slight twist in the tale right there, right? Margaret Somerville is usually the template is that the male character, woos and leaves people, and is heartless while doing so. Here, it's the woman. It's the Corinthian who has a long line of discarded lovers, or discarded lovers in the old sense, people who thought they might marry her one day. Then we have there's another Margaret Somerville. We probably have a few more of her to go. This is Fortune's Folly. It also has a guarantee that you have not read it before, and you can tell right away from the cover they're against a classical frieze of some kind. But you notice one thing from the cover that was a little bit unusual. When you read as many of these things as I do, you notice the little details. And one of the little details here, I wonder if I can show you. Yeah, there we go. This is a Margaret Somerville novel, and you notice the cover there. And one thing you can tell, even with the deliberately a little vague details, is that the man is considerably older than the woman. He's probably in his late 30s, and she's in barely 20. Whereas this, the man is much younger, and you will see that. We see that as a trend in Regency romances. The two principals, in the late 90s, people started to look askance at romance novels in which the male is almost old enough to be the woman's father. Once upon a time, it was springing from the mind frame of the 1950s, the late 1950s, where the man is the head of the household, as the father figure even for his wife. That started to go by the wayside. Of course, you can only that sort of nonsense can only withstand a few Betty Friedan's before it just goes out the window. So here we have the characters closer to the same age, which is kind of interesting. If you find any of this interesting, that's kind of interesting to me, I should say. Miss Pandora Marsh was a very proper young lady who was quite content to live out the social whirl with her aristocratic but impoverished family. Then, without warning, her life was abruptly altered. A man of mystery sent her a priceless emerald necklace to exquisitely complement her red gold hair. Odd that we don't see it on the cover. We see the hair, but not the necklace. A rising wave of rumors cast her as the ardent mistress of a nobleman lately passed away. Nothing this paragon of virtue could do or say could keep a bevy of lusting lords from competing to be her new lover. Chief among them, the imperious Viscount Sarsbrook, freely using his vast wealth and charm to make his conquest. Even worse, in Scarisbrooke's arms, Pandora herself found it hard to believe her protests of innocence, as passion warred with propriety, and desire became more and more difficult to deny. So she has a scandal to live down. Let's see here. Do we have another one? Yes, we do. Oh, okay. Okay, this is one that I have read. It has a little dog on the cover. It also has the guarantee that you have not read this before. This is The Infamous Earl by Margaret Somerville. There's the little dog in the background. I had to reinforce this one or it would have fallen apart. But this is, let's see here. Georgina Morley could see only one way to wed the devastatingly handsome but dismally penniless Lord Thomas Jeffreys. He had to convince her disapproving parents that she would otherwise make an even more disastrous match with none other than the notorious Earl of Dunraven, whose libertine ways shocked even London's sophisticated society. True, Dunraven did know of her plan. True, when he found out, he proved eager to take their imaginary intimacy much further than Georgiana ever dreamed it might go. Georgiana was sure she could manage this most dangerous deception, even when Dunraven began to show the seductive skills that made him the premier rake of the realm. But that was before Georgiana discovered that the fire she was playing with was in her own passionate heart. And I read this just recently. The back cover description, believe it or not, does not do it justice. The problem that I have with it is that a lot of it just happens because the author wants it to, and a lot of it happens because of coincidence. There is a wind-blown bonnet, there is a runaway dog, and when Dunraven, who is a notorious rake, but who is written really well, he's written as a normal person who is being misjudged by society, and also by Georgiana's parents, who don't really have the financial wherewithal to resist him, but they don't like him. In addition to all of those cliches, there's also, and those coincidences, there's also a little bit of convenience, not like this author at all, where when Dunraven learns that Georgiana has made up this plan, that if you don't let me marry this penniless person that I love, who is, again, the foil, the worthy but drab foil of a man, if you don't let me, she tells her parents, if you don't let me marry him, then I will marry Lord Dunraven. Or rather, she tells them she wants to marry Lord Dunraven, figuring, okay, well, next to Lord Dunraven, this milksop will look just great. And it turns out the milksop is an absolute heel. He's a monster. And we get shown that long before any of the other characters do. But when Dunraven learns of this plan, he suddenly not only wants, as the cover makes you clear, he suddenly not only wants to have a little fun with it, but it also makes him fall in love with her, and I'm not sure that it would. But boy, oh boy, boy, oh boy, is it terrific, especially the ending. Oh, good Lord. Because the milksop really almost uproots things. Then what do we have? Okay, this is another old one. This is Melinda McCrae. This is not Margaret Somerville. I think we might be done with her. This is Melinda McCrae, Lady Leprechaun. Again, with a guarantee that you have not read this before. Though she was a widow with a school-age son, Emily, Viscountess Darrow, was still young and lovely, but she had no wish to wed again. Her late husband had granted her an independence no other man would, and she preferred the struggle of being a single to submitting to male tyranny. And this is a problem that is unrealistic in a lot of these books, because that description is absolutely true, and it went all the way back to The Wife of Bath, where a woman who became a widow, especially a well-endowed widow, someone whose family or business or husband had set her up well for after her husband's death, was a separate item in the social register. They were almost a separate gender. And no young woman, especially, who had that kind of freedom would ever go back. Because, especially, not only because she would suddenly have a man to command her fortune and tell her what to do, but also because the man wouldn't be doing it for the kindness of his heart. He'd be doing it to get an heir, to get another child, rather than have her own child be his heir. And keep in mind, pregnancy was incredibly dangerous. Women who had any kind of knowledge of what was going on had by the time they reached 30, they had lost many friends to pregnancy and would want to avoid it at all costs. So, the Duke of Hertford was all Emily abhorred in the opposite sex. This handsome, wealthy, and powerful widower thought women no more than pretty playthings. And when Emily and Hertford were thrown together in a cross-country hunt for 2 schoolboy runaways, Emily had to teach this arrogant aristocrat that a lady could be as strong as any lord, even if he expertly probed her for weaknesses she dared not admit yet could not deny. That's often a repeat thing in these books, is that the woman will have to prove herself at least a bit in the man's world. It happens thoroughly in the new ones, not even just a bit, but just thoroughly, sometimes including one Regency I read a few years ago where it was boxing. But even in these older versions, the woman has to be able to ride well. She has to be able to do some sort of exertion, usually looking for a lost child, in this case 2 children, out in the rain and in the wilderness and at staging inns without resorting to the fainting couch. And that I always find that fascinating when that happens. Okay, then we have Melinda McCrae again. This is the Duke's daughter. Looks like this one takes place in winter. Elizabeth Granford firmly resisted Somerset Graham, the Earl of Wentworth, as he sought to uncover the secret she was determined to hide. Elizabeth also rejected the Earl's proposal of marriage most ladies would have leapt at, for she was someone who wanted nothing to do with wedlock and even less with love. But Elizabeth would have to go beyond her icy show of indifference if she intended to cool the Earl's persistent ardor, for already the furious pounding of her own heart was betraying her. And again, a little detail that I always pay attention to in these things is what the rank of the nobility is. It doesn't seem to matter to romance writers. They just automatically assume that any rank of the English nobility is the equivalent of vast wealth. And I usually go along with that, but it's still interesting to see how many of these things feature dukes, how many viscounts, how many earls, almost no barons. But anyway, I think, I haven't done, again, the number crunching, but I think that earls are by far the most popular rank in any of these things. And then we'll do one more for today. It looks like this is another Melinda McCrae, and also the last of Melinda McCrae, so God knows how long this will take. I'll only do these once in a while, I promise. This is so much fun, though. This is another Melinda McCrae, and this is another one that's in perfect condition. It's in the shiny, finished condition of the day that it was printed, even though that day was 30 years ago. Let's see here. 2000. This came out in 2000. That's pretty late. And once again, you notice, you can tell already, once you start to get a hang of this thing, you can tell already that this must be late. This must be a late Regency romance, because the two are not only contemporarily good looking, and this is a photo cover, obviously, but also that they're about the same age. The man is crouching closer and closer to being a super hottie. This is Melinda McCrae from just a few years before. See the difference? Still antiquated dress styles, but one is a painting, the other is a photoshopped photo, and in this, the man looks like a boy, more and more like a boy. I think that's fascinating. I think it shows where the whole thing was going, and it also shows why, right? You want the man on the cover to be more sexually suggestive, because the whole reading atmosphere is loosening up. You can't. That's what sank these things, is that they were seen as behind the times and stuffy. Your grandmother's romance, like Betty Neal's. Let's see here. Lord Lindale would do anything to ensure that his family's 800-year-old castle survived. Hence the castle in the background. But as the walls fell down around him, and as Lindale's younger brother incurred huge gambling debts, things did not look promising. The only way to restore the family fortune was to marry an heiress, a rare commodity in the Dales of Yorkshire. Okay, so this also will not take place in London. That also is comparatively rare. Susanna Chadwick knew that being an heiress offered its share of problems. Her greedy cousin had already attempted to force her hand in marriage in order to obtain her inheritance. And now, after trudging through the mire and pouring rain to escape his clutches, she had ended up here in the crumbling old castle, with Lord Lindale and his brothers watching over her. Again, the familiar exercise of the two meeting by random, usually with inclement weather involved. She wouldn't dare tell them her secret, and while she didn't want another suitor to steal her hand, she didn't expect that one of them would instead steal her heart. I don't know if this is having the opposite effect on you, but every one of these descriptions is making me want to read these things. and I'm right at the end of the Regency that I'm reading now in my bag, so I'm going to have to pick a new one. It could be any one of these. But anyway, this has gone on too long. I'm going to wrap this up and sit down. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.